Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ansell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. Today's episode is brought to you by Amori. How was your first Christmas without your mom? How was your wedding day without your dad? If you know the pain of losing someone you deeply loved, Amori is for you. Amori is a digital time capsule that helps you reflect on mortality, navigate emotions, and create heartfelt messages for your children, so you can feel prepared and let your presence be felt through life's many moments, even when you're no longer here. Let your words become a source of strength and comfort for those you leave behind. Tomorrow isn't promised, but your love can be. Download your mortality companion today at amori.life. That's AMORI.life, and use the code WhenWeDie50 for 50% off. Hey everyone, I'm super excited for today's episode because it's one I've been trying to make happen for a while. This was actually our second time recording because we ran into some tech issues the first time around and lost a big chunk of that conversation. It then took a while for our schedules to sync up again, but I know you're really going to enjoy it. Elizabeth Fournier is known as the Green Reaper, and when I first heard about her, I knew I had to find a way to get her on the podcast. She's a recognizable advocate for green burials and runs a funeral home in Boring, Oregon. She helps families have more natural and personal experiences with death, whether that's a burial on private land, a service in a conservation cemetery, or a funeral held right at home. We talked about everything from what a green burial actually involves to some of the emerging trends like water cremation and human composting. But we also got into her personal experiences with death, starting with multiple losses in childhood, and how those early moments helped push her towards a career in the death industry. Now, a quick heads up before we get into it. Towards the very end of the conversation, a client showed up a little early at her funeral home, so things halt and wrap up kind of abruptly. I'll pop back in during that moment and give a little context, but I do want to thank her for giving me a few extra minutes at the end to close it out. Here's my conversation with Elizabeth. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for being willing to try this again with me. We obviously had some technical difficulties last time, and we were having a wonderful conversation. And so I'm sure we'll, again, have a wonderful conversation. And not that any of the viewers would know this, but hopefully none of the things that I say come off as disingenuous to you because I'm maybe repeating myself again. But I'm also like looking back at some of the notes, and we initially had our interview the day after I finished your book. So everything was fresh. And I have all these like shorthanded notes. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, I don't remember what I was thinking there. So I think this might be a more candid conversation. So maybe that's even better than kind of, I don't know, maybe it was playing up to be a little bit of like a book review of your memoir, which again, I will say, loved it. I enjoyed it so much.
Oh, thank you.
I was like, the last part of the book, I was crying.
I love that. Thank you.
I will repeat this quote because I thought it was just really good. And it was kind of talking about, so you've kind of built this amazing kind of funeral home out in Boring, Oregon. And then this is, I think, still on the part where you're like, still kind of figuring it out there and figuring out how to do, green burials and like burials on people's lands. And I don't remember the person's name that this was in relation to, but you were talking to one of the family members and they kind of asked if they should feel bad about it feeling nice the way that it was done. And you responded, I think it's how it should be when we lose someone we love. It's easier to bear when we do it together. And I feel like that was just like, I don't know. That moment, I was just like, oh, this is so, so beautiful. So I'm so excited to sit down with you. Like I said, we've had a great conversation before, and I'm hoping we get through the whole thing this time.
Excellent.
So maybe we can just dive in a little bit. I think, the first question that I always kind of ask is, what is your relationship with death? And in your book, and again, this is already starting to sound like a book review again, but I think the thing that I was so impressed with you was the fact that, and it's just that anyone in general that starts out their life from a young age has an idea of like, this is what I want to do. And not necessarily, I think, when you were very little, you're like, I want to be a funeral director, but you definitely knew that there was this passion around death.
Yeah, it was just such a common thing that happened because as a kid in grade school, My mother was sick and then died. And then my dad's parents, who lived in our family house, they were also sick and they died. So, going to a little private Catholic school in the 70s, the priest was always at our house giving blessings, or there was always the family names at mass for prayers, or I was missing school because I was in the hospital with somebody. So it was just sort of a funky, sad, bereaved way to live. And as people died, and as there was always some sort of a funeral, what have you, kids would come up to me if maybe their family cat died or grandma died, and they'd come talk with me because there was that, I think, just inane reality to know that I might be this only person that's going through this, that's even part of the fabric of school or their community. It's really not very normal to be a young child and deal with a death of a family. It doesn't happen too often that way. It might be a little bit more removed, but three people in your own house. So I was being asked to say the prayers at the cat's funeral, or to help go through maybe what happens at the funeral home when this kid is going to go visit grandma. And then when I was playing with friends, a lot of my grief and a lot of my, I guess, the therapy that would come up came in the form of games. And I would have a sandbox in the backyard, and I would line up my brother's Hot Wheel cars, and I would play funeral procession, and I'd have little graves dug, and I'd have my dolls there. And they didn't really have a lot of black outfits. We weren't that fancy, but they were mourning or there at the funeral, or kind of whatever I was sort of imagining. And then I would go through magazines and cut out any sort of pictures of graves or any sort of scene that reflected death. And I know that's a little bit funky for a little perky blonde kid who's 8 years old, but that's how I dealt with it. And kids knew that I was definitely on a different path.
You're processing.
Yeah. And I realized that I was on a different path. And I'm thankful that I never went dark. I always stayed to the positive. And I think being raised in the Catholic faith, it was, well, this is wonderful. These people are in heaven, versus, oh my gosh, now you're isolated and you're alone and have to figure it out yourself, kid. So the processing led to more time. And then as I got a little bit older and I could drive a car, I would go to people's funerals I didn't know and sit in the back row because, again, processing, trying to go through the emotions. My dad remarried right away. And so we didn't go through that regular unfolding of the organic life of, okay, now there isn't a mom in the house, and how do we figure things out? How do we look at this? There all of a sudden was a new mom. So I had to figure out the grief and the counseling and all that on my own. And when I was a teenager, pretty early, I knew that working in a funeral home or something was my calling, and not, again, because of the idea of some morbid curiosity. It was really more, I had so much experience at that point talking to people about death and dying and my experience, and going to cemeteries and going to funerals and watching movies surrounding death. And it just really seemed like I was building my knowledge base, I suppose.
Totally. And I think there's the practicalities of like what you do now. But I think what it seemed like in the book and what you're talking about now is like a huge part of the calling was like being there for other people, throughout your whole life. Like you were processing, but you're also helping a lot of people process. And it seems like that's a huge part of, what you do. Like that quote I read is, I think that's a beautiful thing that you're able to help people. It's not just you're running a business. You're this person, who, runs a funeral home or whatever. It's you're actually helping people and comforting people. And that's something that you've been doing your entire life.
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging that. It's really not like I'm selling shoes here, or I'm just trying to fill my appointments up with people who need to come in and fill out paperwork. It's really getting to know people and invisibly holding their hand and hearing their stories and being a part of their process. And like the quote you read about Jamie, the service that I was at, and the family said, wow, this feels sort of good that we're all in it together. We truly are all in this together. When we look up at the sky at night, we are all looking up at the same stars. We are truly, in this together.
And I think it's beautiful that, like, I guess maybe I shouldn't say this is what it should be, but I feel like in my heart, I want it to be something, when I die, I want it to be something that is almost celebrated in a way. And that's kind of how Jamie's funeral seemed, like, it's not that necessarily people were happy that she was gone, but it was like that there was this beautiful memorial and this like connectedness. And I feel like a lot of what I hear about, some of the processes of like formaldehyde and all this stuff. And again, this is, at least for me, it just feels like disconnected. And I don't think that's something that I would want.
Well, it's just what we did back in the day when we had somebody die. It was
Yeah.
very community centered and very family based. And there would be a death in the home, and the women of the community or the church or the neighborhood or the family or what have you would bathe the person and dress them. And they'd be laying in the front room, and the family would be cooking food and playing music. And the men might be outside building a casket or getting a grave space dug. And from the beginning of the process all the way to the actual burial, it was truly family and community centered. You didn't have an outside person come whisk your person away, or an outside business say, oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. You want to see your person? Your calling hours will be tomorrow between 11 and noon. It really wasn't like that. It was definitely slower, more organic, very hands-on. And as time has gone on, the concept of home burial and green burial and things have really gelled with people. People have decided, yeah, that sounds really good to me.
Yeah.
Because you can make your own choices. You can build your own casket. You can drive your person. You can make a lot of choices. You can be a lot more hands-on. Families have a lot of rights, and people are really excited about that opportunity.
And that's something that you've done an incredible job of, like, I don't know, I guess maybe seizing the opportunity or like seeing the alignment in the stars. But I mean, your nickname is the Green Reaper, and you do green burials and you do these at-home burials. Like, I think that's such an amazing thing. And that's why I was so excited. I think it was one of the guys who's at the head of the Death Cafe in Portland. He's the one who kind of was like, you should reach out to her. And I was like, oh no, I don't know if I should. She sounds so cool. And I'm just doing a, little old podcast over here. And that, I guess I don't think I mentioned that in the intro, but it's like, I reached out to you and 9 minutes later you responded, let's do this. And it was just like, oh, it's so awesome. And then I was like, well, shoot, I need some time to read your book. But yeah, it's like, you've worked incredibly, like, again, it just keeps on coming back to a little bit of a book review, but it is a memoir. So it's like, it's kind of like my research about you or whatever. You've worked incredibly hard and, did a lot of things that I don't think people would be willing to do to get where you are. Like, just some of the stories about what you had to do, not in, to get to Boring, but just at the place that you have out in Boring right now, like the leaky ceiling. Like, every time I was reading about that, I was like, oh gosh, this is stressing me out. I just want that to get fixed. I want them to get this to work. But it's, yeah, you've worked incredibly hard, and I think you've built this really beautiful thing. And what a cool nickname, the Green Reaper.
Oh, well, thank you, Zach. I appreciate that greatly. And I'm glad you could feel the stress of the roof, because that was pretty horrid. So the book that you're referring to, The Green Reaper, it's a nickname, but it's also a memoir. And the reason why I wrote this book was because I was having these crazy experiences, and just of starting out at a repurposed goat barn in the country, and all of the stuff that comes with that, the single pane windows and the roof that leaks and the phone hardly ringing, and my friends saying, you are an idiot. You need to go back to Portland, go back to the city where you actually work at a real funeral home and you're doing this the real way and you're actually getting a real paycheck, and all of that, but kind of sticking in here. And it was tricky and it was trying, and there was lots of tears, and it was a lot. But, within a week of being out here, I received a telephone call from a family. And they said they live on an intentional property, which means it's a group of people who aren't necessarily blood related, but they've become a family. They live together, and they live sort of as they, will. A lot of times if it's an intentional community, people are in teepees or people are in trailers or whatever they have, and versus one structure of a house. And they had a person die, and they wanted to keep them there and bury them there, and they wanted me to help them. And when I got this phone call, it was this moment of, wow. So I was really transparent with them, and I said, okay, I want to help you. I'm not sure how to do this. I've never done this before. I'm new out here. I've always worked for a corporation in a major city, but let's figure this out. And wouldn't you believe it? It was that simple of making a couple phone calls and calling the county and calling the state and calling, the local city and making a bunch of calls and people pretty much saying, well, there's nothing on the books that says you can't do this. So we kept her there. And by the next day, we had a little backhoe building a space or digging a space for a burial. And the sons came and they caught fish on the local river that we ate. And she was wrapped in a beautiful little quilt that she had made years back. And it was this peaceful, beautiful ceremony on the property. It was a real ceremony. There was drumming and chanting, and people were speaking about her. And we all had these intentions that we wrote on paper and put in this copper bowl, and then they were burnt so the smoke floated upwards. And it was so special and so amazing that as I drove home that day, I was thinking, wow, I always thought my calling to this industry was because I had so much death as a child. And through processing that and trying to figure it out, it really opened me up to learning about all the different cultures in National Geographic magazine and talking to so many people I probably wouldn't have talked to because they had a death or somebody was ill in their family. But when I was driving home, I thought, wow, I really think why I'm called to this is because of that green burial. It was that aha Oprah moment, that eye-opening moment of this is what I want to do. I want to provide this opportunities for people where we can do this how they want it to be within their own comfort, as long as it's legal and ethical. I want to make this happen. And about a week later, I got a telephone call from a man and he said, are you that lady that buries people in their own yards? And that was sort of shocking because I thought, oh no, oh gosh, that paranoia.
Like, well, hold on. I need more context.
Yeah, that was scary because that could be, I don't know if it's a career ender or whatever it is, but that scared me. And I kind of said, well, and we talked, and then they said they knew these people, they knew this happened, they want to make this happen. So again, I kind of said, let me go through some phone calls here. And I called, and then I found the local county zoning and planning is really the department I'm supposed to be calling. And they really said, well, if you're in the rural part of the county and they have at least 1 acre and they own it free and clear, and you're so far away from a watershed or the electricity or the road, sure, no problem. And so we went ahead and did it. And so about the third green burial I arrived in the backyard and the family said, look, the Green Reaper's here. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so clever. And oh my gosh, I love that. And yeah, there you go. So that's where that came from. I don't really wear a green cape or have this branded on things. It's just more a sweet country nickname I was given, and I hope to wear it proudly. And sometimes I think, oh gosh, I hope people don't think that nickname is supposed to be flippant about death, because obviously it's a take on the Grim Reaper, but it's the natural, ecological Grim Reaper. And it's suited me well. I've had it for 20 years, and it's been a very fun ride.
Yeah, I find it very cool, but I get what you're saying that, obviously don't want it to like anger people or whatever. I also think we kind of talked about this a little bit when we did our last call, and I was like, okay, part of my future death plan is to find an acre of land, outside of Portland near Boring, Oregon. The problem is I think I'm going to have to die before you so you can do it. So I have to work out that part of the plan, but I love what you're doing. How much of what you're doing would you say is green burials versus, would you say, I hate saying that, traditional burials, because that doesn't feel like the other category, but how much of what you're doing is green burials?
Okay, so if I answer this, it doesn't sound impressive. So let me give you a little bit of context. So I'm in Oregon. This is a
Yeah.
state where it's 80% direct cremation. People just want a cremation, no visitation,
Mm.
no service, no burial space, just cremate me. So keep that in mind. The whole West Coast really is 80%.
Yep.
So I'm a full service funeral home in the sense where I don't embalm people, I don't cremate people, but I offer people whatever they want because as a funeral director holding a license, my job is to allow families to make their own choices. So with that said, there's a lot of
Yeah.
cremation. There is families definitely who want to be in the metal casket and want to be embalmed and want to be in a standard cemetery. Absolutely. And then there's the natural burial. I'm going to say for all the funeral homes in the Portland area, I take care of the most green burial. But when I say I take care of about one home burial a month, and I take care of probably 2 cemetery green burials a month. That doesn't sound overwhelmingly impressive, but with the whole scheme of things and green burial being so in the zeitgeist, that is really heavy compared to
Yeah.
what other funeral directors and what other funeral homes are doing. I mean, most funeral homes aren't burying people in their yards, and it's fully legal in many, many states across the nation. And in Oregon,
Yeah.
our rules read that it has to be specific counties. For instance, Portland, our largest city, is under a county called Multnomah. That county says, I don't care how much acreage you have. I don't care how rural you have. No, there's a big NO. I happen to be in Clackamas County, and they still don't say anywhere in the county. It's got to be a rural part of the county. So not downtown. If you live by Mart, it's got to be in a rural part. But there's plenty of counties in Oregon that say, sure, great, no problem. But would you believe the state south of me, California, says, nope, no private land burial. And then the state north of me, Washington,
Oh, wow.
just put a law through recently which says, okay, if there had been a prior person buried on private land, you can do it, but otherwise, no. So there's really only the 5 states that don't want private land burial, and that's Arkansas, California, Indiana, Louisiana, and kind of Washington. So maybe we're at 45 and a half.
Okay.
Point. So that's pretty good. So all those states say fine. Now that's just backyard burial. Green burial at a cemetery or a natural preserve or a conservation burial ground, every single state has at least one of those. Most states have several of theirs. Just here in the Portland area and the outskirts, there's probably 9 cemeteries where you can have a natural burial. So private land burial, backyard burial, home burial, that's not for everybody. Because even people who have land say, I don't want to do that. I might sell the property. That might weird out my family. I don't want to do it.
Totally.
Others say, that's okay. We've got plenty of places in other cemeteries that allow you to do this. And that's fantastic.
Yeah. That also, in some ways, kind of leads towards, I think you talk a little bit about, but I'm curious about, and I don't necessarily know if like newer is the right term, but like, I think you talk about water resummation. I think you also talk something about vertical burials. I know there is a place up in, I think Seattle, or maybe a couple places up in Seattle that do human composting. Like, are you seeing, it feels weird to say, new trends in the industry or things that are kind of becoming more popular? Or is it just people are kind of, or people even, like, are you seeing trends from, I'm seeing, and again, you said, 80%, that's a huge percentage, but are you seeing, hey, it used to be 82%, and now, people are kind of moving back towards, actually, I don't want to be cremated. I do want to be buried, but I want to do it in a green way.
So cremation numbers are always going up. And the reason why is because mostly it's the most affordable option because it's going to be just you're paying for the simple cremation.
Yeah.
Now, if you die at home, you have property at home, you can technically be buried for free. You don't have to even hire a funeral home. You can do all of that legally, sign a death certificate. I mean, you pay $30 for the Oregon State filing fee. You can pretty much save a heck of a lot of money. Most people in the country have their own shovels, backhoe, Kubota tractor, all of that. So it's pretty simple to be, but people don't know this is something they can do. So the options also are there is a burial at sea, We can bury people at sea. No matter what state you die in, you can get to the closest ocean and have a burial at sea. That's very green. That's eco-friendly. That's something also we do here at the funeral home. Another piece that can happen is the aqua resumation or the eco cremation. This is a water-based cremation. And this is going to be something that it's a zero carbon footprint way to have ultimately a box of ashes, but the process is eco-friendly. So we take care of a couple of those a month. So that's something else that happens. Another piece that you'd mentioned too, the human composting, that's called natural organic reduction. And that's the legal name. And there currently are 5 places around the Portland, Oregon area that will allow this. There is 3 in the Seattle, Washington space. There's one called Herland Forest, which is about 80 miles from me. It's right across the Columbia River in the real southern part of Washington. So that's very, very close to the Portland area. And that's outside in a natural cemetery. And I work with them a lot. A lot of my families choose that because that's the least expensive. That's also outside. It's also the closest to Portland. And then there's one place in Oregon that's just started up. I believe they are just working directly with other funeral homes. So that isn't something that I believe families can go tour or necessarily do, but just so people know there is a adapter of that here. Also, there's many states that are allowing to have composting. I don't think people always realize this, but you can be composted in these states. And this is really the order of the states that legalized human composting, where you can be turned into compost. You can have your compost in the forest, or family can take some of that soil home. The states, because they're all across the country, and some of these states might be shocking: Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, California, New York, Nevada, Arizona, and then back to the East Coast, Delaware, Maryland, Minnesota, and Maine. And there's always states that are going forward and putting this on a ballot to vote for. So people think, oh my gosh, they think of New York and they think of, Manhattan, and how can you do that? Well, there's lots of rural places. Also, think about Seattle. There's 3 places that are industrial in Seattle that do this. So you can have options if you want to go green. Do you want to be buried in your yard? Do you want to be buried in a cemetery? Do you want to be composted? Do you want to have a burial at sea, a full body burial at sea, not scattering ashes, your whole body in the ocean? Or do you want an aqua-based cremation? There's also 2 states, Maine and Colorado, that have outdoor funeral pyres. They don't do that many of them. They really want to take care of people that are local. It's a little bit trickier to get involved if you're not from the Crestone area of Colorado, for instance, but it is something that can be done. So if people come to see me and we're talking about green options, I say, just hang on, wait a couple years. There probably will be another one.
Like, I'll have another flyer in a couple years. Yeah, I've looked into the pyre, I grew up in Colorado, so I've looked into it. And I'm like, I just want to go visit, next time I'm back home, because it seems like a very interesting way of doing it. So we've kind of I love that you can just like rattle off all the states. It's so impressive. We've kind of gone like very detail oriented. I think that is one thing, is people don't know about all the options. And so I'm glad that we're talking about it, because I think that is part of, hey, you do have options, and these are some things that you should start thinking about what you really want.
When I started taking care of the first green burial, and just in case somebody listening doesn't know what a green burial is, that is your body natural in some sort of a container that is natural going into the earth that is natural. So we look to not have embalming, not have a casket that's not going to biodegrade, and then not be in a space that's surrounded by a concrete liner, grave box, vault, what have you, just a natural body in a natural container going into the ground. And many cemeteries, again, say, fine, you don't have to have your metal casket to come here. We don't have to put a polypropylene box into the ground. You can just do your thing. That's great. So when I first started taking care of families in a green way, I realized I've got to be educated. That first family that called me, I had no tools other than, yes, I'm excited. So I had enthusiasm. I had nothing else. The second family that came along, I thought, okay, I have firsthand experience now, but I've only had one. So I had to let them know I've done this one time. I found out a bunch of information. I'm still learning, but let's make this happen. So of course, as more times have gone on, I've learned a lot of things. And I also, what I found with families, and when you're providing a service that isn't the norm, you do need facts to back you up. You do need to know who to call about things and how to talk to families and say, these are the states where we can do this, and these are the counties, and this is how we do it. So you're not just some wacky funeral lady in the country that's doing this weird thing. People actually realize, wow, you might know what you are talking about. And The Green Reaper, the book, also came from families saying to me, and other funeral directors calling me saying, you should really have a website, or you should really write a newsletter, or you should do something where you can write down stuff that you do, because other funeral homes were calling and saying, well, how do we do this and what's the rules and all that? So my next book that came out was called The Green Burial Guidebook. And that's truly a guidebook which helps families, funeral directors, whomever, take a look at it and have more knowledge, more tools, and be able to step by step do it themselves. It talks about, this is how you build your own casket. This is how you transport somebody. This is how you dig a grave. And I even go into types of shovels, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You have definitely thought of it all. Anyway, I want to kind of pull back. What do you think happens when we die?
Well, Keanu Reeves was asked this question about 2 years ago, and he had this most profound answer. He said, I know that people who love them will miss them. And wow, what a sparkling, fantastic answer. From personal experience, as well as things I've read and all, I believe that something pretty darn amazing happens. I believe that this isn't it. This isn't all we see. We just don't die and we're done. There is definitely more, and a lot more is happening and going on. And I have done different lectures around town, and somebody will come up and talk to me and say, hey, I just want to share my experience. And I've had a lot of people share their experience of how they died because they drowned. They were surfing and went under and hit their head, and they drowned until somebody pulled them back. Or something happened where they were able to, they were on the table for an operation, and they came back to life. And all of them tell these incredible stories of how they saw their body, and then they all of a sudden were safe and warm and saw people they hadn't seen, and there were colors, and it was magical, and everybody has this beautiful, beautiful story. And then when they had to come back to Earth, man, were they pissed off. They felt like, oh my gosh, no, I don't know. I want to go back. I want to be back with grandma. I want to be back with whomever. This is what I want to do. And it was really upsetting to not be able to be there. So it sounds pretty great. And is that heaven? Is that an afterlife? Is that whatever? It just sounds, I don't know. None of us truly know until we're there. But what I've heard and all the books that I've read, it sounds like we really don't need to worry about our loved ones when they leave us. They are taken care of. They are on their right path. They are right on schedule. They are someplace safe. And isn't that wonderful? I was really, really close to my father. And when he died a couple years ago, I have done nothing but smile every time I think about him, because I think, wow, that great guy, he is off in his cruise ship in the sky. And how fantastic. And I also believe in signs. I also have asked him a couple times to send me a sign to let me know he's doing okay. And, all of a sudden a beautiful bird I've never seen before will show up at my feeder. Or I have this list. The very last thing he wrote before he died was his shopping list for Bi-Mart. And I have it hanging on my wall here in the funeral home. It's sort of tucked into a frame. And it will fall occasionally on my desk. And I know he's thinking of me. So it's just those little reminders of people cross over. But, there's something there. And I'm excited to figure out whatever it is when the time is right.
I am always so envious of people like you who are like, I'm so excited to find out. Because, that is a huge part of this project for me is my fears and anxieties around death. But I will also say, and I don't want to discredit anybody else that I've talked to. I've talked to a lot of wonderful people and had a lot of wonderful conversations. But for some reason, coming from you, who has dealt with a lot of death, I'm like, she's probably right. You know, she knows what she's talking about. so that gives me a little peace.
Stories, and I've just read so many books because I've learned when I was in college, I was in an environmental science class, and that teacher was very disappointed in us students. And he said, I just don't get it. You're taking bio-scio, you're taking environmental science, and none of you seem to be watching any shows about this topic. None of you seem to be reading any books or any magazines. I ask you what you're doing and what's new and what are you learning about environmental science? And you guys all just show up in class and take notes and expect me to teach you everything. He said, if you are a student of environmental science, you need to be a student in your free time too. And that always stuck with me. So I realized this is my occupation. I'm a student of mortuary science, I guess. So it's my job to educate myself. Yeah. So the reading and the learning, and now with the advent of YouTube, and you can read all these interviews in the palm of your hand on the smartphone. I mean, we've come a long way since it was just periodicals at the library. You have such an easy advantage to learn and be educated. So I think whatever somebody does in life, know everything, be an invaluable resource. And I'm my own boss and I own the place, but if I was working someplace, I would want to be so incredibly educated on my specific niche that they would never fire me because they couldn't, because I know almost everything and I'm hungry to learn anything more. I think it's really wonderful to open your eyes and learn, be a sponge, absorb it all, have conversations, listen to podcasts like yours, make it happen.
I did not pay you to say that. I promise I did not, but I appreciate it. I think that's a huge thing that I'm trying to do right now is just like be incredibly curious. And so for a long time, it was like, I don't want to say, I have a real hard time talking about near-death experiences because for some reason, like, it wasn't a part of this topic that it was something that I was super interested in. But then, talking to people about death, inevitably it comes up. It's like, well, have you read about near-death experiences? And I was like, no, I haven't really, And finally, about a month or two ago, I read a book called After. It was a recommendation from someone else I interviewed on here. And it was a really fantastic book. And that, it left me like, okay, I do have a lot more questions and I shouldn't have been avoiding this. But in general, I'm just trying to talk to incredibly knowledgeable people like you. I'm trying to talk to people because I don't have a ton of experience with death. Luckily, I've lost grandparents, but to me, that's kind of the name of the game. We know that's going to happen. I haven't lost anybody really untimely. I don't really even remember like that much as a kid, like the pets that we lost, so Jackson no guarantees, life is unpredictable and all that stuff, but Jackson will probably be the first really, really big death that I have. And that's, coming soon. But I am trying to absorb as much knowledge from other people who have experiences that I don't and read books about death. And, one of the books I read a couple months ago was I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically about, I had done all these different books around death, but this one was about anatomy. And this person, was in medical school or whatever, and kind of breaking down the body and the connection that she had with this cadaver, essentially. And that was the first time that I was like, I think that's been the one book that I read that I was most uncomfortable with, because it was like, that kind of made me face the fact that it's like, oh yeah, there is just this body at the end too. And I haven't really contemplated that. Okay, so I'm going to pop back in here really quickly. This is that moment I mentioned at the top of the episode. She has to run out and talk to her client really quickly. And when she comes back, she tells me she can give me a few more minutes. I stumble over my final question, but essentially ask her, what would you want your loved ones to know if you died tomorrow? And so we'll jump back in now with her response.
Oh, I would tell them that My time here with them has been absolutely delightful. And please don't worry about me. I am off having a great time. I'm doing all those things I never had the time to do. I'm reading all those books. I'm actually taking all those vacations I could never take. I am hanging out with my mom and my dad and my grandparents and friends that have died. And I will be saving a space for them, and I'll see them when they arrive, and I'll be sending them signs, and just to always think of me and laugh and be happy. And it's all good. And don't ever, ever spend any time worrying about anything that you said to me that was unkind, or times when I called you and you sent it to voicemail versus picking up the phone. It's forgiven. It's fine. I love you, and just be well.
I love that. And I don't want to make light of being able to spend time with family members, but you might have really, really sold me on Death Now with knowing that I will be able to get through my reading list that is just ever growing.
Yeah.
If I can just read in the afterlife, that's a dream right there. I'm buying what you're selling.
I agree. I have loved talking with you, and I absolutely appreciate you talking with me.
Yeah, same here. Is there, do you want to share your website or anything like that? I'll obviously link it, anything that you want me to, but how can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at Instagram, Elizabeth Green Reaper, and then I also am at cornerstonefuneral.com, and I'm also at thegreenreaper.org, and happy to help.
Perfect. Yeah, I will link that all in the show notes. Yeah, I appreciate talking to you, and thank you so much for doing this again.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.